Hi everyone, Richard Wong here. So today we have another review, and today we are reviewing the Huawei P20 Pro smartphone. In order to make this review not a super long review, I'm going to skip over most of the features that are carried over from the previous Huawei smartphone. Check out my previous P10 and Mate 10 Pro review if you want to learn more about some of the features that are carried over from the previous smartphone, such as the light painting mode, the aperture mode, the portrait mode. So yeah, I will put the link below, you can check it out. Huawei is one of the first company that put dual rear camera on their smartphone. I think it was since the Huawei P9 that they have the dual rear camera. All those previous Huawei rear dual camera setup, basically they all have the same focal length, and one being a color and the other one being a monochrome camera. Now this is a bit different to most of the other manufacturer. For example, the Apple iPhone, they have one wide angle and one telephoto lens on it. The reason of having camera with two different focal lengths is that they can switch between the wide angle and the telephoto lens, and there'll be no loss in image quality. So both approach have their pros and cons. The Huawei approach will give you better image quality at the wide angle, while the other approach will give you better image quality when you try to zoom in. Since both approach have their pros and cons, why not combine them together? And this is exactly what Huawei did this time. So they keep the existing dual camera with the same focal length setup, and they added an additional telephoto lens. That makes it the first ever smartphone that has a triple rear camera setup. But not only that, Huawei has also massively upgraded the main wide-angle color sensor, and this time they give it a 40 megapixel 1/1.7 inch sensor. 1/1.7 inch is huge for a smartphone, so this is approximately double the size of most of the competitors' camera. The 40 megapixel sensor also has a quad layer structure. Basically what it means is it can combine 4 pixels into one super pixel that would further improve the low light performance. But when you are not taking photo under low light, you can switch it back to the 40 megapixel, so that gives you a lot of resolution. Now the 20 megapixel monochrome camera seems to be relatively unchanged when you compare to the Mate 10 Pro. The new 8 megapixel telephoto lens has approximately 80mm equivalent focal length, so they give you approximately 3 times zoom. This is significantly longer than the 2 times zoom which is available on the Apple iPhone and also the Samsung Galaxy smartphones. And Huawei has implemented a 5 times hybrid zoom, which I believe is a combination of the 3 times optical zoom with a little bit of digital zoom. At 5 times hybrid zoom, there is virtually no loss in image quality. You can even go up to 10 times digital zoom, but at 10 times digital zoom, you will get noticeable drop in image quality. The telephoto camera has built-in optical image stabilizer. The optical image stabilizer seems to be quite effective at reducing the chance of image blur. Keep in mind that the telephoto camera has a slightly slower f2.4 aperture and also a smaller sensor, so the low light performance of the telephoto lens is not as good as the main camera. As I mentioned in my previous Huawei smartphone reviews, I really like the camera app on the Huawei smartphone. I find it very responsive, and the GUI design is overall very good, and there are also tons of features in the camera app as well. Now the camera app has been relatively unchanged since probably the P10 and then Mate 10, Mate 10 Pro is pretty much exactly the same. But this time with the P20, Huawei has redesigned the camera app quite a bit. Now one of the most obvious changes is that previously the Pro mode, which is the manual mode, you can enable it from pretty much anywhere, but now the Pro mode is moved to a separate mode in the main menu. This really makes sense because a lot of other features cannot be used in combination with the Pro mode anyway, so separate out seems to really make sense. However, a lot of other features can only be accessible by first choosing the More mode in the main menu, and then there will be a pop-up secondary menu, and then you can choose one of the features in the pop-up menu. This includes the new slow motion mode, the night mode, and then other modes like the monochrome and the light painting, etc. So in other words, this replaced the old grid menu setup in the previous Huawei smartphone. This is definitely better than the old design because I think a lot of users didn't really know that you can swipe from the left edge of the screen to the right and then to bring out the grid menu. However, I think it's still not the perfect design. For example, why can't I access the monochrome mode from the main menu? Why do I have to go into the more and then go to it? I think it would be good if Huawei let users to customize what they can see in the main menu. So for example, if I want to use monochrome mode a lot, or if I want to use the night mode a lot, let me put it in the main menu and let me rearrange the order of the main menu so that I can access the feature that I want to use the most easily. But apart from that, I still really like the Huawei camera app, and I definitely think this is one of the best camera app in the market. Now when you are shooting in the photo mode, the camera will use its Master AI feature and try to recognize the scene you are shooting, and you will try to adjust the camera setting accordingly, and that will give you the best looking picture. The Huawei Mate 10, Mate 10 Pro that was released late last year were the first camera that has this AI scene recognition feature. But those two phones can only recognize 13 different scene categories. With the new P20 and P20 Pro, it can now recognize 19 different scene categories. So this is approximately 50% more than what the Mate 10, Mate 10 Pro can do. The camera can recognize the scene very quickly. When you point your camera to something, it normally can recognize the scene within half a second to 1 second, and then you can see the camera adjust the settings very quickly. Compared to the Mate 10, Mate 10 Pro, the AI scene recognition on the P20 and P20 Pro is definitely quite a bit of improvement. However, occasionally the AI scene recognition does get it wrong, and sometimes the changes applied by the Master AI seems to be a little bit too aggressive to my taste. I feel there's one improvement that Huawei can make in the future. Basically, is to let the user to adjust how strong they want the Master AI to affect the photo output. So maybe have like a Master AI strength in the setup screen, so with a scale from say 1 to 5, with 1 being the weakest and 5 being the strongest. The P20 Pro has a hybrid 4-way autofocus system, which is using laser, the depth map, face detection, and also contrast detection. That definitely sounds very impressive, and in real life, it does work very well as well. The autofocus is very fast, very snappy, and is very reliable. Even when I'm shooting under very low light, the autofocus also seems to work very well, even though it's quite a bit slower. The autofocus system also has a tracking mode. Basically, it can detect what are the moving objects in the scene and make sure your main object is always in focus. So overall, P20 Pro's autofocus system works very well in real life, and I'm very impressed by it. And just like the previous Huawei smartphone, you can double tap the volume down button when the camera is in standby mode, and it will wake up the camera, bring up the camera app, and take a photo very quickly. However, the difference is with the P20 Pro, it happened a lot quicker. Very often, it only takes 0.3 seconds for it to take a photo after I double tap the down volume key. Now, one of the selling points with the P20 Pro is its maximum ISO of 102,400. When I first heard the P20 Pro can shoot at such insanely high ISO, my first thought is that it must be purely marketing gimmick. There's no way a smartphone camera, even though it's bigger than the average one, can shoot at such high ISO. But if you have watched my low light shooting video, which I compared the P20 Pro with my Nikon DF full frame camera, which is one of the best low light professional Nikon camera according to DxOMark, you see that at ISO 51200, the photo that I shot on the P20 Pro actually is very comparable with the photo that I shot on my full-frame Nikon DSLR. I can only assume Huawei did some very clever computational photography trick in order to make the P20 Pro manage to shoot at such insanely high ISO and still manage to output a very nice quality picture. So if you are still not happy with the insanely good high ISO performance from the P20 Pro, there's a special night mode which allows you to take even better quality long exposure night photo by just hand holding the camera without using any tripod or monopod to support the camera. It will try to balance the high contrast night scene by doing multiple exposure at different exposure level and then blend together the different images. It will help to recover the highlight and the shadow area. The result definitely looks very impressive. However, some of the photos, I feel like the highlight and shadow recovery seems to be slightly too aggressive. So when that happens, I will bring the photo to an image editing app and just try to increase the curve or contrast a little bit and make it look a lot better to my eyes. Another big surprise that came with the P20 Pro is its 40 megapixel output image resolution. I was also a bit skeptical about it and didn't expect it to resolve much more detail than the typical 10 to 12 megapixel photo from the other smartphone cameras. But after doing some comparison with some other latest smartphone, I have to say the 40 megapixel photo from the P20 Pro definitely can capture a lot more fine detail when you compare to the photo from the other latest smartphone cameras. This is a photo I shot the other day. This is the full picture. I can zoom in quite a bit and you can still see a lot of details in the photo. Now, one thing I have to remind you is that when you are shooting in the Pro mode and you have enabled the RAW output, no matter what image resolution you selected, the RAW output is always 40 megapixel. So for example, if you select the 10 megapixel output, what it means is it will give you a 10 megapixel JPEG, but the RAW is always 40 megapixel. And the RAW photo is about 80 megabyte each. So it's actually quite easy if you want to free up the whole 128 gigabyte internal storage. Unfortunately, the P20 Pro doesn't have an external micro SD card slot. Otherwise, I would really love to buy some big micro SD card and chuck it into the P20 Pro. If you look at the number, 40 megapixel is actually higher resolution than a lot of DSLR and mirrorless camera in the market. Even a lot of professional DSLR are only like 20 to 30 megapixel output range. So I did something silly and I did some comparison between the P20 Pro and my D800 DSLR. I said silly because even though the D800 is not the latest DSLR from Nikon, but the 36 megapixel full frame sensor is still like 20 times bigger than the sensor on the P20 Pro, and just the lens that I attached to D800 is already pretty much the same price as the P20 Pro. And I also adjust the settings on the D800 carefully and try to get the best image quality from the D800. So yes, it is definitely a very silly comparison, but the result actually surprised me quite a bit. Now here are the two photos. One is from the P20 Pro and this one is from the D800. If you zoom in a little bit and look at the center crop, so this is the center crop comparison between the P20 Pro and the D800. The image quality from the D800 definitely is better than the P20 Pro, but the difference is a lot smaller than I thought it would be. And now look at the edge of the photo. While the P20 Pro appears to have a little bit of color cast, the sharpness and details it managed to capture is actually pretty much the same as the D800 photo. In my Huawei P10 review, I mentioned that the video capability on the P10 is nowhere as good as its photo mode. Fortunately, Huawei has improved their video recording quite a bit with the P20 Pro. First of all, even though you still can't do full menu adjustment when you are shooting video, but at least now you can apply exposure compensation, adjust the white balance and some of the settings yourself when you are shooting video. Now P20 Pro can shoot 4K video. The image quality is pretty good. Unfortunately, there's no image stabilization at all when you are shooting 4K video. Now when you are shooting 1080p video, you can enable the electronic image stabilization, which Huawei call it the AIS, and the result is actually surprisingly good. The 1080p footage shot with the AIS enabled is very steady and very smooth. Check out my P20 launch event video, which was completely shot on the P20 Pro handheld with no external image stabilizer. You can see the video is very smooth. I even got some people that asked me if I was using a gimbal. Apart from the usual 4K and the 1080p video, the P20 Pro can also capture slow motion video at up to 960 frames per second at 720p resolution. The 960 frames per second footage quality is pretty nice, but it does has a bit of compression artifacts. The recording time is 0.25 seconds, which is slightly longer than the new Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus. You can shoot at lower frame rate if you want to get longer recording time. Just like the Mate 10 Pro, the P20 Pro also has a huge 4000 mAh battery. This gives the P20 Pro class-leading battery life, and you can take lots of photos and video during the day and not have to worry about draining the battery too fast. As mentioned at the beginning, this review I only focus on the new feature and changes that comes with the P20 Pro. And because of that, I haven't mentioned some of the very awesome features, for example, the light painting mode, the monochrome mode, the aperture mode, and the portrait mode. So if you are not familiar with these features, please check out my previous review and video. I put the link below. I've been using the P20 Pro for almost a month now. I use it every day and I took lots of video and lots of photos under many different situations, and honestly I am super impressed by the camera on the P20 Pro. The 40 megapixel main camera output very impressive high resolution photo. It can also capture photo at ridiculously high ISO, and it also has a very useful night mode. While the P20 Pro is not the first smartphone that has the zoom feature, the 5x hybrid zoom is definitely a breakthrough as well. Maybe because of the P20 Pro, in the future we will see other smartphone camera with a 5x zoom, maybe even 10x or 15x in the future. If you are a casual photographer who normally doesn't process your photos yourself, and you won't go into the menu mode and adjust the settings yourself as well, then the Master AI feature on the P20 Pro can definitely help you create some very nice looking photo easily, even though sometimes the Master AI it seems to be a little bit too aggressive to my taste. Now if you are a photographer like me who want to have more manual control, then it's easy. You just flick it to the Pro mode, then you can manually adjust the camera settings, and then you have the 40 megapixel RAW file, which gives you a lot more post-processing latitude. So is the camera on the Huawei P20 Pro perfect? Probably not. The lack of image stabilization in 4K mode is a little bit of disappointment. But having said that, it is already the best camera on any smartphone in the market right now. So thank you much for watching this video. I hope you find it informative. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please consider subscribing it, and I will see you next time.